Good afternoon, and welcome to today's session, Being Black in Academic and Corporate Culture. It is our pleasure to turn over today's session to our presenters.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. How are you doing? We are honored and pleasure to be here today to work with NACE on such a hot topic that has come up over the last couple of weeks, but is a topic that from a national perspective is long overdue. And it's a topic that we should be addressing years and years ago as we move forward today. I'd like to introduce myself. I am Dr. Tierney Bates. I currently serve as Assistant Vice Chancellor for Special Projects and Interim Executive Director for Career Services at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And I'm gonna take a pause to let my guest speakers with me introduce themselves.
Good afternoon. I'm Jarmon, all the way from Nashville, Tennessee. And I own a company called MEPR Agency. We do communications and community engagement and really work with organizations to help them communicate more effectively. And sometimes we have to get to diversity, equity, and inclusion before we can be effective communicators. So I'm glad to be here.
And hello, everyone. My name is Kacheyta McClellan. I bring greetings from Ivy Tech Community College. I have been working in higher education for about 13 years now. 8 years of that was doing a lot of D&I work at the University of Southern Indiana. The balance of that has been doing a little bit of D&I work, but a lot more career development facing work for Ivy Tech Community College. Love doing this work, and I agree with Dr. Bates. This is definitely a timely conversation. I'm so glad you're all able to join us today.
Thank you, Shai. Thank you, Kia, for definitely being with me today as we dive into this topic, being Black in academic and corporate culture. One of the reasons why we came up with this dialogue and talk, over the last couple of weeks, we had some conversations of what it's like to be Black in certain spaces and places. And as we've seen has come out over the course of the last couple of weeks, there is a lot of thought, a lot of feelings, a lot of emotion that is happening right now in our country and happening right now around our what's going on topic-wise. And it's very important for us. We do have a slideshow that we want to share with you today as we get into the PowerPoint presentation. So it's very important for us to have that as we move through. And again, we're excited to have everybody on the call. We will be checking the chat from time to time. So go ahead and list your school, who you're representing. I know some people that are already on the call and is excited to see you guys moving forward from there. So I want to start off kind of giving some foundation around the history of the Black employee and the Black academic. And I say this for a couple of different reasons. First and foremost, obviously I am talking to a lot of individuals on this call today that are working at institutions, but I also might have some employers on there. And as we face a society that has to own up to a lot of righting wrongs, as my friend Kia likes to say, it is very important for us to give some homage to the past as well. But it's also to give us some framework. So I'm gonna start with the first Black CEO. I say that for the simple fact that the first Black CEO of a major Fortune 500 company is mostly during most of all our lifetime that are on this call. And that will be Dr. Clifton Wharton, who was the CEO back in 1987 of TIAA-CREF. We didn't get another person until Franklin Ray's until 1999. And I know you've heard the names of Kenneth Chenault, Ursula Burns, Mary Winston, all these other names. But if you think about that as a Fortune 500 company, and you think at the C-suite level of a CEO, it has just been in our lifetime in the last 30 years that we've seen individuals rise to those occasions. But as an African-American, or as Black as I like to say for myself, we've been around for hundreds of years in this place and in this community, really dedicated to what the fabric of this country was built on personally. So I still need my 40 acres and a mule from that perspective, but also moving forward to say that, hey, now is the time that companies must get past certain things around the C-suite level. I also want to give to my scholars on the call today that are working in academics, the idea that the first Black tenured professor wasn't into the 1940s at the University of Chicago. And there's actually a book about him. His name was Allison Davis. And he actually, most of his research was on social work and the lifestyle and the social inequities and racial inequities of African-Americans, specifically in the South, from that perspective today. Now, there's other individuals I want to give homage to is Ursula Burns, because Ursula Burns was one of the Black female Fortune 500 CEOs. She is no longer there with Xerox since the company is split. but I want to pay homage to my Black women as well, because it's very important to understand they walk alongside Black men when we're going through these struggles and going through these certain determinations. So that is just a little history I want to share with you around Black CEOs, Black scholars, as far as that is concerned. And many of them went to an institution, undergraduate-wise, that had its first Black professor. That was either in the 50s, 60s, or 70s, determined upon the institution in the Great Migration, where PWIs, predominantly white institutions, went on a hiring of Black intellectuals, as I like to say, from that perspective, to kind of drive what the demand was for their students. But fast forward to today. Here we are, June 2020. Just a few weeks ago, we witnessed the death of George Floyd. And it has set off a spark across our country that has really, really caught everybody's feet to the rug. But it was a very interesting process that happened over that couple of weeks. And that was, first of all, the performative acts that have happened over the last couple of weeks. Examples are, each one of you on this call has probably had an institution that was either on board or late getting out an email or a statement about basically diversity, equity, inclusion. Our question was that statement about Black people, or was it putting everybody in one box? I say that because a lot of things that came out was people of color, that terminology, or diversity inclusion, or underrepresented. But the issues that we're talking about today face Black people. There is no disrespect to my LGBT community. There is no disrespect to my Latinx community. There is no disrespect to my Asian Pacific Islander community. But there's different things that need to be addressed around Black people in this country, specifically, that have not been addressed since 1865. And so we must move forward for that. So I give you examples of schools went and did committees. I'm pretty sure every school on here has had, we're going to form a committee. If you're in the business school, you might already have one. You're talking about who's on that committee. A couple different things. One, stop putting all the people of color on the committees. We know what needs to be done. We kind of know as Black people what the issues are. Use us in a different fabric other than serving on a committee. Second, we've seen a lot of things around money. Everybody's donating. You know, the article was about the founder of Netflix coming out, giving $120 million, $40 million going to Spelman, shout out to Spelman, $40 million to Morehouse. But do you realize there's 105 HBCUs? And that was a performative act in itself, because everybody knows about Morehouse and Spelman. But could I talk about Tougaloo College, who could have used $40 million? Could I talk about Johnson C. Smith that's on the call today, Wiley College, Edward Waters colleges, and those different colleges could equally use that $40 million that can change people's lives. Also, we know that most schools will go through workshops, discussions, trainings, all this other great stuff. But I want to back up a couple of years. About 12 years ago, we went through that same thing in higher education. And higher education is ebb and flow. Some things come back, rise up, and some things go back down. And diversity, equity, inclusion is always one of those things that goes up and down. So if you got that email over the last couple of weeks from your institution, I would echo you got that same email when Mike Brown died. I would echo you might have got that same email around the time Philando Castile died. And so or Sandra Bland. So I would ask you, if that was 5 years ago, that was 10 years ago, 12 years ago, where is the true accountability for an institution, a department in an office at currently right now? Because we know these issues are happening, but it took the death of George Floyd for not only people to wake up, but majority of white America to truly wake up to see a man killed of what myself, Shai, and Kia have been talking about and have experienced since I was here. And I want to point out what Starbucks did. Well, Starbucks, I don't drink Starbucks. My wife does. More power to her from that perspective. But that was another performative act that we saw. That first, there was no comment. You know, we're not going to put anything out. Then we roll back on that. And now, look, we want to have a standard of what our staff is wearing and doing and all this stuff. But again, you know what Starbucks could do for me? They can give me a franchise. I know they don't franchise, but if they want to help Black people, you can help me get a franchise to help me economically in my community moving forward. I'm going to move on because we got a lot to talk about today. And I want to make sure that my proposed panel also chimes in and gets things going as well. And I'm going to turn it over to Kia because we really want to talk to Black people. And I know that we have a very obvious audience on this. And so I want you to take notes. I want you to learn today and be very engaged as we move forward with this talk. And I'm going to turn it over to my good friend, Kia.
Thank you, Dr. Bates. I want to pick back up on some of the performative actions that you talked about really quickly, and then we can get into talking specifically and centering Blackness in this conversation. The thing about organizations like Netflix and Starbucks and others who are giving this money, I just say they're giving you your money back. They're not making investments. into the community, they are giving you back what it is that, one, you've already spent, and two, by them taking away or not making statements or taking away some of your ownership, if you will, in their organization, they're just giving you back the money you're going to spend now because you're excited, because they've said something, they have performed the act. And traditionally and historically, we have, as Black individuals, we have long made it okay and comfortable for forgiveness. We've forgiven so many things. And we're currently in the middle of two pandemics. So we have the coronavirus or COVID-19, and then we also have racism. On my desk, I have a note that says, but racism is also a pre-existing condition. And very much so, we forget that in the academic space or even in the corporate space, that you all are people first. So the labor and the intensity and the aggression that happens, that we often don't talk about that. We go immediately to how we fix the organizational culture. We go immediately to how we get onto these committees and how we put people together. But what I question is a few things. So one, today I put a post up online that says, if your normal job as a Black individual in the workplace is not to talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, or anti-racism in some way, then the organization needs to pay you a consulting fee. Because the reality about it is, anti-racism, race, any of those conversations, that is labor intensive as a Black person to have to then share with all of the world what it is that we're feeling. That emotional labor re-traumatizes. So I hope I'm speaking to, while I'm centering Blackness, I'm hopeful to speak to the white colleagues on the phone to say, you have to make sure that as you're asking people, is everything okay? We do that, and you're looking for the right answer. You're looking for pacification in some way, and we can't do that. What we have to do is take a step back and say, how did we get here? And so we don't have enough time in the conversation today, but go back and understand and dismantle your own history. And so the thing about history is, we often start with American history, but unless you are Native American indigenous who built this country or built this land, and then, or you were brought here from Africa as a Black person, so continue to build up the land, you're not native to here. And so racism and upholding white supremacy happened in your country also. So go find out that information first. Go make sure that you understand how we got here, how academic institutions got to be what they are, how the church and religion was a large part of the demise of people who are Black and indigenous. Go back and research that, understand that. What I find is that people often don't have these conversations with themselves. So then when they bring it into the workplace, they expect for the labor to be on someone else. My encouragement, though, for you as you're thinking about being a white employer, or you're someone who is an employer in the workspace and we send people to you, is don't put that emotional labor and that trauma onto someone else. What I'm asking of you to do is to be courageous enough to say, how do I fix the problem? I work from this graph that talks about going from diversity, which is changes in numbers. So we're often like, well, let me look and count how many Blacks are on the call today, and let me look and see. That's what diversity looks like in most of your institutions. What I'm asking you to do is to see how you can advocate for budgets that then push you to anti-racism, which is about shifting power. Because racism is about power, and Black people don't have the power to be able to change their own oppression. So it's your job, if you're with a white institution, a predominantly white institution, a traditionally white institution, you're white person or white adjacent or white presenting, it is your responsibility to figure out how you can show up on behalf of other people. I will pass it back over to Dr. Bates because I can go forever, but I wanted to make sure we're centering really Blackness in that. Oh, and let me say one more thing to my Black individuals, my brothers and sisters in this. What I would say is, it's time for us to step back as well and to see how we've been complicit in some of these conversations and figure out how we begin to dismantle the upholding of white supremacy as well. What have we, and what you just put on the screen, centering Black excellence and mediocrity, the realities are that we push for our students, and they should be absolutely excellent. But the reality is they should also be able to have moments of mediocrity, because when they're not able to do that, one, it sets a precedent that the only way to achieve is to be Black and excellent. But the reality is we've had excellent people who are hanging from trees today. The reality is we have excellent people who have gone as far as they can go in their career, but yet and still one thing, redlining or some other form of government oppression has happened that has taken their business away. We have always shot for excellence, but the challenge is that will not keep you alive. And so I really want us to encourage our students and those in our career spaces to be absolute excellent. But if they have a moment of mediocrity, that is also okay and should not be, it should not warrant reasons for firing, and certainly not reasons for death. Dr. Bates, I'll give it back to you.
Thank you, Kia. Thank you very much. That is a great point as we talk about centering around Black excellence and mediocrity. It's funny that you even mentioned that. I, right before this presentation, got a call from a mentee of mine who works at an institution which was talking about how do we handle the situation around with our Black students. And she told me what they were going to do was do stickers on their doors, T-shirts, and basically say we stand in solidarity. That is, to me, another performative act to say we're not truly addressing what you're talking about, Kia, and really looking at changing power dynamics and understanding what that looks like at an institution. She was so frustrated from that call that she actually hung up. So I don't even know if she has a job, and that's why she called me real quick. Before the simple fact, she said, I was on that call with all my senior leadership. I expressed my concerns. I expressed everything that I could. I've been saying for the past couple months, things were going to bubble up, and this was just icing on the cake. And she literally hung up on the phone with her vice president and her assistant vice presidents on the call. Now, this is a Black female, and she's one of very few at our institution and in her role from that capacity. And she felt she couldn't show up as her authentic self to even address the issues that the department was trying to address, but what they were trying to do was put a Band-Aid on the situation versus having true surgery. And that's what we all do at our institutions. We put on Band-Aids, we put on bandages, but what we really need right now is that true surgery to go in and correct what you need to be a healthy person. And so I use that as an example to say that if your staff can't even show up to your space of employment in the career service office, or your students, and they can't be their authentic selves to express to you how to move forward this agenda around Black people and try to help call out the same things that you're trying to address and how they're becoming performative acts or not acts at all from that regards. And they have to hang up the phone on their vice president and then call their mentor, Tierney Bates, and say, help me find my next job because I'm not sure if I'm going to have one today. That is a sign that we're not doing what we needed to be doing at our institutions. And so I say this to our career services people that are on the call. We have a due diligence, really, particularly to change the narrative. Why? Because we're working with students first and foremost at our institutions. Second, we come in contact with employers every day. I'll give you a prime example. If we have not developed anything around language with our employers, within our own career services offices, and what that means, we need to do that today. That is one act we can learn and do and implement right away. Second, let's throw out this word fit. I keep destroying the word fit. Fit would not have me in my place right now if it was that determined. I say that because fit is what most institutions, most organizations, and most people want. They want somebody that looks, walks, and talks like them. But if any true leader knows that you want everybody on your team that it looks different from you, that acts different from you, will give you pushback and tell you the things that you don't want to hear, knowing that you still need to hear them. And if you're a leader, and notice I said leader, not a manager, these are the type of people that you want to surround yourself with. Because everybody knows, and data has shown it, that the more diverse your workforce is, the more diverse you have people in senior leadership level roles, the more your organization performs. So I would challenge us. I just put out something that Claudia Allen put out on NACE for me when we had this conversation about 5 criteria that you can use to attract or support the initiatives around diversity, equity, inclusion. Well, I told Claudia, I don't want to say diversity and inclusion because diversity gets watered down. And it's one of those watered down words, because if you ever hear the one talk by the sister from Stockton University, diversity means we throw everybody in a bucket and nothing happens. And so we need to really truly have dialogue around fit, because fit, when our companies come to recruit our students, is killing our students, especially our Black students. If they come from HBCUs and they've come from a predominantly Black community and they've never been around a corporate culture before, of course they are told to assimilate. They can't show up their authentic selves. Black women can't come in with natural hair or braided hair without somebody asking that question. And so it's important for us to understand that we have to destroy fit. We in career services have to start having dialogues around the word fit. I say that as somebody who's went through multiple interviews myself, have been a finalist, and they always come back with the word fit. And when I ask them, what does that mean? And can you give me an example of fit? And nobody ever can. And so that means secretly to me, there's something there that's missing that is not being told to me as a Black male. But I want to pause there because I have to get Kacheyta in, and it's important for him to talk about some of the things that he wants to address as we move forward. He gives us some great solutions and ideas that employers and career services can implement.
I can definitely do that, but I got to address a couple of things that both of you mentioned. You talk about fit, right? Oh my goodness. Whenever you look at a person who is a good fit or good for a particular job, if you can, go ahead and allow me to share my screen. I'm gonna go ahead and share mine while you giving me the keys to that. If I can. So when you talk about fit and you're looking for someone that's going to be a good fit for your company, for your institution, if you look at, you know, the person that is the candidate in front of you, do they have the educational background? Do they have the experience? If they have all those things and they interview well, but then they're still met with, well, you know what, they're just not the best cultural fit. So what is that cultural fit? And that's just it's just really a lame cop-out. I think it's taboo to talk about Black. I see that my colleagues on the call right now, my fellow panelists, and I'm so happy to be in your presence. You both have Black Lives Matter in the background. And I think it's great that we're in a place that we can actually call out Black and say Black, because historically, we haven't been able to do that. It has been taboo to do that in the workplace because it exposes a shameful history that is in America associated with white people. And white people feel a certain form of shame because that history has never been properly repaired, right? And I also want to say something to respond to something that my colleague Kia mentioned, sharing all those things that she shared. Thank you so much. I want to make sure that I'm talking to everybody that can hear me right now, that Black people who you go to in the recent past to learn more, to increase your education. I'm glad you're doing that, but please be mindful that to exercise the bravery and the courage and to suffer the uncomfortable transparency that it takes for our colleagues to learn and to grow, that is the education piece. And that education without action is more than the taxing exercise for your Black employees. It's outright offensive. So what we're going to talk about right now is, what are you doing to create a culture that builds trust and takes action? So Dr. Stephen Covey wrote the book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. He followed that with several other books. One of those books was The 8th Habit, and really taking those 7 habits to the next place, to the next level. And within that, he shared in his experiences with going all over the globe. He remembered poignantly one specific time where he had somebody from one of his sessions come to him and say, what do I have to do to build trust? And his response was, well, to build trust, you must be trustworthy. Now, in this time where we're talking about being trustworthy means taking action. Now, from a broad perspective, what does that mean? Well, that means, what are you doing? And you is an individual you, but it's also the royal you. You as an individual, what are you doing? And you as a leader with your colleagues in your institution, what is your institution doing to create a culture that leverages diversity as a strategic competitive advantage? What are you doing to create a culture that threads diversity throughout the organization in training, but not just training, but also in your evaluation requirements? What are you doing to create a culture that encourages, reinforces, and expects inclusivity, that mirrors the company profile demographics of the company, of what your company wants to be? Many companies say they want to mirror the community that they serve. So what exactly are you doing to enact that? And also to enact zero tolerance for behaviors that reinforce those systems of racism and oppression. From an assessment perspective, there are many ways that we can address this. I'm really going to just talk about surveys really fast because it's really good to use surveys. You can survey your employees at least annually, but it's more impactful if you do it at least semi-annually to learn about their experiences, right? But not to just learn about their experiences. You also want to take that information and monitor progress on your established metrics related to employees by demographic category. So what are your Black employees saying? What is their experience like as it relates to the rest of your makeup, right? And since we're talking about the Black employee focus today, I've got a few items that I really want to make sure that we are all looking at. What are you doing to create a culture that is color brave and aims targeted strategies towards the recruitment and retention of Black employees at all levels? And if you're not familiar with that terminology, color brave, totally go to YouTube and check out Melody Hobson's TED Talk, Colorblind or Color Brave. It's definitely worth it. And what are you also doing to make Black employees feel valued and encouraged to be innovative? Empowers Black employees to share their experiences and solutions for inequities without fear of retaliation. Now, I'm glad that my colleague mentioned, you know, if this is not necessarily their full-time job, they should receive some type of compensation as a consultant. But, and also my other colleague, Tierney, mentioned that we know all the solutions, we know how to fix it, but we don't necessarily feel empowered or feel like our voices will be heard all the time. So what are you doing to break down those silos and make your employees feel like their solutions will not only be heard, but even acted upon? And what are you doing to make sure that you're creating a culture that compensates your Black employees equitably, provides Black employees with reasonable pathways to promotion? This goes along with fit as well. If you have Black employees that are in line for a promotion opportunity, maybe they've been with your institution for 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years, and they think it's time. They know that they have the educational background, they have the skill set, they've actually got the heart, they've got the experiences to move into that promotional opportunity that they've applied for. They interview well, they check all the boxes, but then they're met with, you know what, they're just not the right fit. And then they use examples like, you know what, you've been here for a while, we just need you to learn a little bit more. You need just a little bit more time in the saddle. If you can learn and mentor under this new person we're bringing in, you're going to be very successful here with us, buddy. Again, not only just taxing, but outrageously offensive and downright wrong. What are you doing to create a culture that encourages and supports professional development for your Black employees specifically, and connects Black employees with not just a mentor, but also a sponsor? And we know Dr. Bates has told us before in informal settings like this, the difference in the delineation between a mentor and a sponsor. Your mentor is those individuals that's going to help your Black employees develop all those skill sets that they need to be successful at the company. But then your sponsor is going to be that person that's going to bring that employee up through the company and position them with opportunities for advancement. What are you doing to create that culture within your company that has both Black men and Black women in leadership roles, that has both Black men and Black women on your board of directors and board of trustees? We're going to continue this list and also mention, what are you doing, you specifically and your company, to create a culture that ties metrics to a strategic diversity plans that actually is bold enough to name Black men and name Black women within that plan? And if you, I'm gonna take this another, I guess we can call this a sub bullet of number 11, but does your company even have a strategic diversity plan? If you don't, you can reach out to myself or my colleagues on the call right now, and we can help you get started. We can talk about what that looks like. And more relevant to today, provides appropriate accommodations for employees who don't feel safe in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. According to the CDC, we all know that Black men and women are at high risk to and die at an alarmingly higher rate than their peer identity groups. But also with the conditioning that Black people have had, we talk about bringing excellence every single day when we show up. We talk about being the best at everything we do. Think about the story that a person like that might be telling themselves. They might be reluctant to share with their employers. I've got people in my family, in my household, that have pre-existing conditions that could be lethal if exposed to COVID-19. I don't know if I have the space to share that with my supervisor or to share that with human resources so I can have accommodations made. So what are you doing to create the space that they actually feel comfortable and empowered to share what their situation is with you? And how about creates an intentional supplier diversity program that allocates a significant percentage of your budget dollars to Black-owned business contracts specifically, markets to your Black consumers in culturally nuanced ways, and these last two right here, contributes financially and otherwise to causes that benefit Black organizations or scholarship funds specifically for Black students? And what are you doing, my friends, to create a culture that builds and supports employee affinity groups? Now, as we talk today is going to be about a lot of education, but again, education without the action behind it is wasted. It's a wasted opportunity, and it's a wasted cycle that continues, and we'll have more of the same. So with that, I'm gonna turn it back over to Dr. Bates.
Thank you, Shai. This is really good. Thank you for these great suggestions. We got more though. right? We still got a couple more minutes here on the call. And so if you're in the chat, I'm going to ask you in a couple minutes to go ahead and leave some questions for us, for we can kind of try to answer us. And I'll ask Kia, myself, and Shai to make sure we monitor the chat as well, before we can answer your questions. But you know what? I'm going to tell you what Papa Pope told me. I don't know if you ever watched Scandal, but Papa Pope told me you got to work twice as hard to get half as much. And they both are laughing at me right now because as a Black person being raised in this country, my dad told me that, my mother told me that growing up as a child. And I never really truly believed it until I actually got into the workforce from that perspective. And it's very funny because I know a lot of Black folks that might be on that call have heard that. And to my white colleagues on the call, it's the first time you might have heard that from that perspective. And I say that for a couple of different reasons. And I'm going to give you an example. An example of that is looking at the idea that there's one Black person in your office at Career Services or in your employment from that perspective. Do you realize that we put the Black tax and racial battle fatigue on them? Because not only do they have to come into your office where they're probably sometimes not included, but at the same time, they have to work with the students of color or Black, Latinx, Asian Pacific Islander students on your campuses. But as a Black man, as I always tell people, I can walk on my campus and I automatically am going to interact with the Black students and I automatically going to interact with all students. But my white colleagues won't have that same experience because they can just statistically just focus on interacting with students that look like them. That's not the same for me. I have to interact with everybody, specifically in my role. And so that's another thing that you have to think of. So you can't put everything on your one Black employee that's in your career service office or in your place of employment to do everything around diversity. Can you help them? Or can they help you? But I'm with Kia. Give them some incentives. Tomorrow's Juneteenth. Give them the day off if they're going to help you go ahead and put together that plan to help you guys get to where you want to get from that perspective. But that's another thing we need to address. So also, we need to look at an idea of performance metrics. And I'm not talking about just in career services or within an organization employment-wise. I am talking from the CEO, board of trust, supervisors on all judged on a performance evaluation. You are all judged on a performance evaluation. If diversity, equity, inclusion is not part of performance evaluations going forward, and we want to talk about policy and changes, it needs to be. So when my chancellor gets that bonus for us meeting certain criteria as an institution, or when that organization CEO gets a bonus, if they don't meet the DEI metrics that is set forth in their performance metrics, or if I don't meet those, I should not get a performance bonus. I should not, because if that is what we want to really change, it has to start there. My chief diversity officer is not my chief diversity officer. My CEO, my chancellor is my chief diversity officer, because when they speak, change happens. And I know that sometimes they're tied, and I know sometimes it's political, but it takes bold and courageous leadership for that to happen. And so I tell people now, are you going to be a bold and courageous leader? Or are you just going to be one that assimilates and keeps the status quo going along from that perspective? I think also we have to look at this from an NFL Rooney Rule. Now, we know the NFL Rooney Rule did not work, but data shows me for any candidate I interview, I should interview a Black person. Matter of fact, you need to interview two. Why? Because the data says also that even though you might interview one, they still might not get the job. And so it's very important for us to understand that and look at that. I have almost 400 people on this call today, and I'm going to challenge you as you move forward and get off this call is what are you specifically going to do within your space for Black people, whether that's your Black faculty and staff, your Black employees, your Black students moving forward. Again, I also want to understand and look at some things that schools will put out. I know my institution put out about helping support underrepresented faculty, but what about staff? We have staff at the lower level that are talented. We all have talent walking around us every day. We're in a society that talent rules. So what are we doing for the secretary? What are we doing for the lunch lady? I know this for a fact that I took my previous secretary from being a secretary to an assistant director because her skill sets were never looked at by previous directors. And she brought something to the table, innovative, creative, and skill set wise, that made her more than a secretary. But that's what takes leadership to look at people and how you develop and invest in them moving forward. If you look at your leadership at your institution and at your board of trustees and at your boarders at your companies, if they're lily white, there's a problem. Because I notice most organizations have a large number of people of color working for them at the lower levels. But when we kind of get up and start moving up, it kind of dilutes itself back to the normal way that we've seen in society. I want to give a shout out to my man at Reddit. He said he's giving up his board spot. That's great. He gave it up to somebody. Now I need you to give up another one because one is not enough. We're coming for more. And that's what we need to talk about today moving forward. And so it's very important for us to understand that we have to support our staff. We have to gather around that and move forward from there. I'm going to go ahead and pull the slide back up real quick from that perspective before we can keep the conversation going and moving forward. So we'll pause here a little bit because I want to be able to give you some time to reflect on what we've dialogued about. We want to give you some more suggestions, but we also want to answer questions moving forward. On this slide, I have some books for you to think about reading. Good is Not Enough for those in employment in the employer side of the house who are companies and corporations, and also Black Faces in White Places. I know Randall Pinkett personally, and that's a great book. And I think these are two great books, Good is Not Enough by Keith Weiss, as well for those, no matter what, if you're in career services or on the employment side of the house as well. There's also another good book that a lot of people don't know about, but should check out. That is the story, The Last Black Cargo by Zora Neale Hurston. And if you don't know who Zora Neale Hurston is, then you need to go look her up. But this book is an autobiography story about the last Black person back in 1927 who was a slave. And it's very important to understand those dynamics, 1927 to 1865. So think about that. As we move forward, also look at The Last Black Scholar. For my colleagues that are in academic and higher education, if you're a scholar, you should know about Allison Davis and his studies. And David Worrell has went out and did a book on that to understand what that means and how his studies and his work has really been around for years, but people are now starting to discover it. And then there's a book by Damon Tweedy, who is a Duke graduate from their medical school, who talks about being a Black man in a white coat. And for my healthcare professionals out there in the world, it's very understanding to understand that when we talk about COVID and the impact it's had on minority communities from that perspective, why is that? Why is that? It is that because of, I still never got my 40 acres and a mule. It is because of redlining. It is because of systematic oppression from that perspective that I couldn't go and live and do, speak freely, all the other great stuff, or even vote from that perspective if I lived in the South moving forward. So it's very important for us to understand this and move forward and have solutions. I challenge everyone on this call today to do something different. Be bold, be different, be innovative, become the Steve Jobs, like I like to call myself, of career services or HR or of higher education. Because what we're going to have is, consistency is going to go on. See, what we're not really having a discussion about is, when will the next Black man be shot or the Black woman? What we're not having a conversation on is what will happen 6 months from now, a year from now, because everybody's doing performative acts, but what they're really doing is saying, let's put this problem off to the side because I still got to worry about COVID. Yeah, COVID's going to be with us for a little bit, but so is racism. And I'll pause for my colleagues to chime in.
Thank you. I've been watching the chats and I'm really excited to get to some of those questions. So I think continue to ask questions, but a few things I wanted to kind of address, and I think my colleagues here have talked about them, especially when you talked about Dr. Bates moving the one who was your receptionist up to a VP level. We often in academic and corporate America, we only value data and research, not realizing that lived experience is the greatest data that you have. And so when people give you access to their brain in that way and their creative ingenuity, then it's opportunity for you to say, let me listen. So what I would say to those of you on the call, whether you're whatever side of the fence you're on, is listen to people when they share their experience with you. We have a bad problem in America, and it's centered in white supremacy, but we have an issue with really listening to people, particularly when they are not at the same level as us, or when, again, we're calling out scholars and we're calling out VPs. When we say that, then we sometimes forget that there are individuals who also have expertise at varieties of levels. So we have to be mindful of that. The other thing I want to share is those of you who are in employer services, stop sending your students into racist environments. You know that those corporations or those places where you're sending your students, you get feedback from them and they tell you that this place is not great. They are taking your pipeline. Institutions like higher education are pipelines of cultural competency and character and money. So you're sending all of that wealth that cultural wealth out into the workplace to be destroyed. And what happens is, and I saw someone mentioning that mediocrity shows up sometimes because when young people don't necessarily want to, they don't want to extend themselves to being excellent, they have to kind of dumb themselves down. That happens because we keep sending them into bad environments. That happens because we keep telling them that if you're so amazing and you do twice as hard and you get half as far, that just keep doing that. But they watch their peers do just mediocre work. We have to be really careful about the messages, the language that we send, the slave language, honestly, that we send to people when we lash at them, other Black students, when we lash at our young Black students and tell them to do all these amazing things, but yet they see their peers and their colleagues not being able to advance. I mean, being able to advance when they can't, but they're doing twice the work. So I would be really careful about how we frame that. And that happens because those of you on the call who, or those who you're not on the call, because I've also seen, let's have a conversation with VP level people who should be on this call. That happens when you have an actual budget and an actual commitment to call out specific injustices and inequities and historic harms that are happening on your campus and that are happening in the world around you. You're in an institution and sometimes you have these blinders on. Take those blinders off. The rest of the world is also hurting too. And so those students are out in the world as well. So be mindful of that. That was probably one of my last points. Oh, here is a last thought, and then I would love questions. Think about asset-based language versus deficit language. We use a lot of deficit language. We use things like, it's going to be really difficult for us to get this diversity, equity, inclusion plan going. Well, people don't like hard work. So of course, if it's going to be hard to do, I'm not going to do it. As opposed to saying, you know what, this is going to be the most valuable process we have as an institution. So we can learn and we can listen and we can then start to act. That's a very different approach. So when your senior leadership says it's going to be hard, then many people say, I'm not going to do it because I don't do hard. And I'm especially not going to do hard after my already regular job, because usually we tack this on as an extra add-on. So be very, very mindful of that if you're in senior leadership, or of course, as this video goes out to those in senior leadership.
Well, thank you very much. I want to say something really quick too. America, its founding, everything that you talk about, when you talk about America, we were built in systems of oppression. We were built in white supremacy. We were built in inequity. That is the very fabric that makes up America. It is embedded in corporations and buildings, in institute. I mean, any institution you think about is going to have that, right? So we're talking about being change agents. We're not talking about preserving the status quo, because the status quo are those things we're talking about. We're talking about change and disrupting the status quo. And resistance to change reinforces systems of oppression, white supremacy, and inequity. So what I want you all to do, I want you to all be brave enough. I'm challenge you all to be brave enough to give yourself permission to say that, you know what, I'm going to admit my company can be better. My company can be better. I want you all to give yourselves permission to admit that you can do better. And this means empowering your leaders to align resources with strategies that truly improve the Black employee experience. This means exiting, this might be bold, too bold for some, but it's the truth. This is what we need to say. We need to say this means also exiting leaders and employees that do not deliver in these areas. It means doing new things and disrupting the status quo to change for the better. We need to do this as a society. We need to do this because it's the right thing to do, but also we need to do this because this is something that we totally need to do. As the world continues to evolve, we become more and more diverse. I'm interested what the census is going to look like in the future. But if we do not change from a business case perspective, we're not going to be as profitable as business owners. But from a basic humanity perspective, it's the right thing to do, and it's long overdue. So I challenge you all to commit to looking to see what you can do individually, specifically, the individual you and the royal you as well, you being your company, your fellow leaders, the institutions that you're a part of, to dismantle and to destroy systems of oppression and to make this a better place for all of us. I'll give it back over to Tierney, turn it over for Q&A.
Yeah, I'm looking at, as you were talking, I was looking over in the chat, and the chat's on fire right now. And so I kind of want to address two things. I think it was somebody told me the other day, you really want to change things at predominantly white institutions, let's get rid of all the older faculty. And I'm not trying to say get rid of the older faculty. but they prove a good point in some regards because of the pedagogy style that has been taught in academia, right? So who determined what the whole tenure process looks like? Who determined what the whole process around a dissertation looks like? It wasn't me, wasn't nobody that looked like me. So if we're talking about really dismantling some things, I can understand why that person said, predominantly white institutions, you got to get rid of those old guard faculty because they are kind of like Kia said, our stopgate to some of the learning experiences that our students have that already come into a place where they don't feel safe. I want to answer something that was in the chat, particularly about what if you're trying to raise these issues up to your supervisor, up to your team, and they feel like you're causing a problem. And I bet you $5, and if you're in the chat still, this is a Black person asking this question. Why? Because a lot of Black employees that I've worked with always say they want to address these things, they want to bring these things up, but they don't want to come off as being the angry Black man, the angry Black woman, or that these things are just going to be shoved underneath the rug. I would say two things to you first and foremost to answer your question. One, it's your duty to. And if somebody calls you out on it, I want leadership. Because as a leader, I want the feedback to make us a better organization. I know, like I said at the beginning of this, that having diverse opinions and diverse thought will help us grow as an organization. If your organization is not embracing that, that might not be the right organization or area for you. And just on a plug, we're hiring, so call me. The second thing is the simple fact that, again, if you can't allow your employees to help you become a better organization by sharing thoughts, I would offer this suggestion to you. Ask them to put out a survey internally or externally about the office or internally about what's going on. And let's see what the true complaints is. Well, let's see what the true issues are and how they arise. Because you're probably not the only person feeling it, but you might be the only person saying it. Other questions coming through the chat. Anybody see anything?
Someone said something about this might not just be a faculty issue at PWIs, and that is true. And I also
it's faculty and staff.
Right. And I also want to say this in the same vein of we're putting this together. We're trying to determine what the makeup of this, of what, our audience would be like. And honestly, when in the past, we've had a lot of people participate in things like this. And it's basically, I'm gonna say the choir, people that know it, they get it, they understand it, they share it. But they just don't necessarily have the right language to share with other people in their institutions. So we're hoping that we can give you some things that you can take back to those people with power and be able to advance the causes in some direction, some way of positive growth. And for those, I'm sure we've got a couple of people sprinkled in who maybe this might be your first time seeing any of us on here or going to a session like this. I appreciate you being on. That is the first step of bravery towards change. But like I said before, there's an educational piece and that should be used as something to get to action. So I challenge you specifically to look at some of those things we put on those slides earlier.
Thank you, Shai. And I want to echo to Ms. Brown that just posted in the chat. She says she's being adamant about her next hire is going to be either Black or Latinx. Those are the things you have to do. Those are the things that internally you have to have the conversations around if you really want to create a workforce that is going to be inclusive from that perspective. That is bold leadership. That is leadership saying, I'm adamant about doing this to make changes and move forward. So I want to give her a shout out for that. A lot of you on this call, you're going to have searches. I know some schools are on hiring freezes, but we will come out this pandemic and we're actually going to come out better. Actually, what you should be planning for is what the post-pandemic will look like for you as an office, what the post-pandemic will look like to include diversity. Because what will happen for a lot of institutions is that diversity, equity, inclusion will get pushed to the side because of COVID. Where actually, it needs to rise to the top. And that's why it's very, very important for us to understand that. And so if you're not planning as an executive director or director or whoever's on a call today about what it looks like in the next 6 months or the next year, but you got to look at what's the next 3 years. Because what happened with COVID, of course, is going to impact us for the next 3 years, in my opinion, from a financial standpoint and from just a higher education standpoint. And so what are we doing on that side to make sure we're ahead? The greatest innovation happened when challenges are confronted with us. How do you think Airbnb, Slack, Uber existed? It didn't exist until 2008, 2009. They were all discovered during the great last recession. So I will ask you, as executive directors, as people from NACE, what are we going to do now to be different from 2020 going towards 21, 22 and learn from it to be a better organization, to be better leaders as we move forward in the future? What is the innovation and the things that we're going to stand on principle-wise to make sure that we move forward and have these things and these dialogues moving forward. I think it's very important for us to understand that. I don't want us going back to the norm as higher education. If we go back to the norm, guess what? Nothing would change around diversity. Nothing would change at PWIs. Nothing would change for our students. And so I would challenge all of you to start thinking like that. Be creative. Get in and do some design thinking with your organization to think about diversity, equity, inclusion, and how does it play a role and how you change the status quo. Do we have other things that are coming through the chat? I didn't get a chance to look.
Someone just put a question I thought was interesting. They want to know if there were any career services, professionals, organizations. I'm a member of a few career development or career services associations, but none specifically for Black. Maybe that's something we need to start. Maybe we need to have another conversation about that. I'm open to that.
I do know that NACE has its DEI group from that perspective, but I think there's some things around where we can have specific, like Kacheyta said, is focused on just Black individuals. You know, I heard the other day somebody's a young lady is creating a Black LinkedIn, which I think was very creative and very great idea. She says she doesn't care if somebody hears her idea. She's in the process of already trying to get it together and put it out there. Why? Because again, in certain spaces, we have to empower ourselves to be able to navigate and move forward from that perspective. There are other groups out there. I think it's by state. I know we have NC ACE here in North Carolina. There's other places you can join. Start something. That's what I would say, because it can be organic that can grow into something from that perspective. And if you're on this call, like they have said before, you're on this call because you're part of the choir or you're here to learn. And so if you're either or, now's the time for us to, even in this group right here in this chat, list those who are in this chat and how you can contact individuals if you want to reach out to them. Put your LinkedIn in there so we can connect from that perspective. I'm pretty sure NACE has some way for us all to connect as well as we move forward, because what we should have is this great talent, great mind power that's going on right now, that we can share ideas, we can share ways to make our institutions and our offices better moving forward overall. Seeing a lot of people post stuff in the chat, so thank you guys for doing that. I want to give a shout out to University of Tennessee and Clarence Vaughn. Hopefully, the Haslam Business School is going to change how they do business because of Clarence Vaughn. Kia, I know you got more to say. Let me say this about Kia Jarmon. If you don't bring Kia Jarmon to your institution or to work with you, I've been working years, amazing woman, an amazing entrepreneur who can not only speak about entrepreneurship if you're a business school person, but also can speak to all the issues we're talking about right now. And also she's on this whole Black philanthropy thing right now. And so that's another thing I'll plug. If you really want to support this cause, get with Kia, because Kia has this whole Black philanthropy thing. And as a former fundraiser myself, I know it's important for us to fundraise and support organizations that are doing the work around that space. But I'm gonna stop there because Kia, I just need to be blessed by you.
No, I'm seeing the word neutral and neutrality in the chat over here, and that word probably rings, like what I hear when that's said is equality, which is not what people are seeking. It's not what people need. When you decide to be neutral, that is really probably one of the greatest ways in which you uphold white supremacy, is to say we're going to all be neutral. See, we're all the same. But let me just tell you why the one race, the one, I don't see color, let us all kumbaya doesn't work, because I don't have the same experience walking into the bank, the hospital, the mortgage company, the business center. I don't have the same experience. I can't have a neutral experience in any of those. So why do I have a neutral experience as it relates to coming into the college career office? Why is it not that you can be brave enough to say, we're going to specifically think about how we right historic wrongs? That's what equity really is about righting historic wrongs. And if you want to go further, what I encourage is justice, which my definition of that is seeing those historic harms and taking the leadership, the power and privilege, also known as money, and leveraging that on behalf of people who have been historically harmed. If you're not willing to do those things, then quite honestly, I start to question your individual mission as a person sitting in those offices. Because again, I'm talking about you as individuals. You are also bringing systems of oppression into institutions who have systems of oppression. And so at what point are you going to say, we're not going to do equal neutral work, we're going to be specific because I can look at the numbers and I can see that historically we have X, Y, and Z happen. Remember what I said, that upholding supremacy is about using research and data against and for these systems. So if I say I have research and data that shows that our students are not able to get jobs, then you should be able to use that to then make sure that Black students, Latino students, LGBTQ plus students, or whomever it is you're fighting for, that they're able to get access to those opportunities specifically. Because what happens is white individuals have plenty of pipelines to get those jobs, whether it be through their fraternal relationships, whether it be that they can call someone without an issue. There's always a legacy there that Black people don't have, and it's based on the wealth gap, and it's based on economic injustice. So it's based on all those things. So this is not just about, oh, we have to be neutral and open and kumbaya. That's not what this is about. And if this were going longer, I'd probably go a little further with that, but I'll leave it there. And then I think there's some other questions about.
Well, I just want to echo what you're saying. What people don't realize is that it's about giving up something. Most white males do not want to give up anything, right? And so if you're talking about what my man did at Reddit to give up his seat, that speaks volume, right? So the question is, what are institutions, predominantly white institutions, really willing to give up to right wrongs? Especially my Southern schools. My Southern schools who kind of leave out the history that Blacks built their campuses, served their campuses, but you don't read about it until like 1909, that the first Black person was there, but you know that institution is over 150, 200 years old from that perspective. What are we doing to right those wrongs from that perspective? And I think it's very important that, yes, you have to give up power dynamics. And I think that's what it boils down to, Kia, is people are scared to give up that power. Because here's the thing, the best time for Blacks in this country was right after the Civil War, 1865 to 1877, the Reconstruction. Why? One, in the South, there was 9 million people. 4 million of those were Blacks. What was scared is that they would take over the South. Why? Because they could vote, Black men could vote. 2, they had the population. 3, they were supposed to get 40 acres in MU, but Andrew Johnson revoted that and gave the land back to the slave owners from that perspective. So just imagine if I'd had my 40 acres in a mule, my great-great-grandfather from that perspective would have had that. There would be multiple Tulsas that would still exist to this day from that perspective. There would be multiple Rosewoods that would exist to this day, and we probably wouldn't be having this conversation.
Yeah, I'm gonna say 2 things. I think at the end of MLK's life, a quote that I think was very powerful from him is he called for a radical redistribution of economic power. And that's what really made people start raising eyebrows. It was great when he was talking about being nonviolent and don't hit white folk back to hit Black folks, because we like that. But when he started talking about that radical redistribution of economic power, that wasn't good. So that's a food for thought. I want to give a shout out to Monica. Thank you for putting in the chat something about the Black group for the group for Black career development professionals or career services professionals. I've gotten in there, and yes, I'm in. So it looks like we have a 3-minute warning.
Yes, we do. And so I'm going to go ahead and each give you about 30 seconds to wrap up. But I just want to end with this. If you're in career services, you can do multiple things. Focus on your Black students. You can go look at that article we put out with NACE, the 5 different career professionals. I list about 7 or 8 things on there. Number 1, start using supplier diversity for your office around Blacks. 2, look at your hiring practice, even internal organization. 3, don't just put everything on the Black staff in your office to do from that perspective. And then last, I would say challenge your leadership executive directors at the table of what you're doing for your Black students. Chai?
I'm just going to echo everything that I've said already, everything that we've already mentioned. And then again, there has to be action. There has got to be action. We all have to have the courage to be bold enough to say, I'm going to do something. I'm going to expect my leadership to do things as well. And I'm going to look for opportunities to make sure that it happens. And we all have to find some kind of way to hold not only ourselves, but hold our leadership accountable for action and taking the steps necessary to shift things in a way that's more positive and equitable for your Black employees, your Black students, and individuals in this country.
Yeah, I know you can't do it in 30 seconds, but I know you fire. Tell me what you got.
No, I would say focus. we're running a million miles a minute. So many people are trying to figure out how to get DEI right, which I would, for one, probably stop doing the DEI and start calling out exactly what you want to happen. We want to encourage Black people. We want to empower Black people. We want to employ Black people. Say those words versus DEI. It gets very conflated. I would also say that go and do your individual work. So many of you, the reason why you're asking some of the questions that you're asking that are centered in oppression and white supremacy is because you have not stepped back and done your own work, and you haven't dismantled your own privilege that you bring into this professional space. You have to do that in order for you to be a good servant, leader to the people that you serve, which are those students. Making sure that our legacy, making sure that people like my son have an access and opportunity to greatness can only happen when you are prepared to walk in your mission and you're prepared to do your own individual work. So thank you for the opportunity. It's been excellent.
Thank you to all of those who are on the call today, all 300 plus that called in. I would say another thing you can do if you're PWI, support your local HBCU. You really want to do something different, work with your career service office at your local HBCU to help support them moving forward. Thank you to NACE for using this as a platform for us to get our thoughts and get our information out to individuals about really addressing what there needs to be done for Black people moving forward. I hope that you guys all take this away and do something today. As he once said, the great civil rights person you might all know, be the changes you want to see, Muhammad Gandhi. Thank you guys all.